road ahead. So as we have seen that the turmoil which has been caused in last 1.5 to 2 months, and recently the the government which was been declared and the list which was been put out by the Taliban, that is really starting. So today we would be discussing the situations which are developing, and at the same time we would also be evolving some consensus which we can put forth with respect to this particular discussion. So I welcome for this roundtable discussion this distinguished panel of experts, Professor Dr. S.D. Muni, Professor Dr. Anuradha Chenoy, Madam, Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, Sir, Dr. Medul Islam, Sir, Arvind Yellari, Sir, and also I welcome Mr. Kamlakant Das, Sir, as the moderator. Along with this distinguished members for the discussion, I welcome P. Subbarao, Sir, Head for our Division on Business and Leadership. I also welcome Ravindranath Patil, Sir, the Senior Director for School of Public Policy, and Professor Parimal Sudhakar, Sir, Head of the School for School of Government. As a tradition of MIT World Peace University, I request the technical team to please begin the World Peace Prayer.
जय जय स्वसंवेद्या आत्मरूपा देवातुति गणेषु सकलार्थमति प्रकाशु म्हणे निवृत्तिदासु अवधारि गोदी गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुसाक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Thank you. So this roundtable discussion, what we are having on dealing with Afghanistan and the road ahead. This is in light with the developments which has happened, and also the recent developments in with the taking up of the government by the Taliban. So certainly we are all we are in a situation wherein the development is not at all good for the region per se, and also for the world community at large. I would request our senior director Ravindranath Patil, sir, to have his initial opening remarks.
Thank you, Professor Gopal Vamne, sir. Our today's distinguished keynote speaker and former Ambassador of India,
yes,
Professor S.D. Muni. Today's eminent panelist, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, Dr. Medul Islam, and Dr. Arvind Yellari. other eminent professors, eminent academicians, and students from different parts of the country. I would like to welcome you for this webinar on a very important topic that is affecting the geopolitics of the region. I'm talking today both as an academician as well as a person who was emotionally attached with the subject, not from academic point of view, but as a human being. When I joined Indian Trade Service in 2002, I met my boss. His name was Mr. Bipin Menon. And during my first interaction, I got to know that Mr. Bipin Menon was one of the co-passengers in the flight IC-814 that was hijacked in December 1999. He survived that particular night, and uh, but I heard horrific stories of those 5 or 6 days when the passengers were held hostages in Afghanistan. A lot has changed in last 2 decades. In 2014, there was attack in on Indian consulate in Herat, and my another batchmate from Indian Foreign Service, Amit Mishra, was posted over there, and he survived that attack. And but the geopolitical situation continued to be as complex as it was even in 1999. While we were hoping for a great change during the initial discussion, Madam Chennai had talked about our foreign policy, and she said that we have done fairly good job. While we are hoping for a stability in Afghanistan, again, we have reached a situation where there is a debate between modern world versus medieval world. In August 2020, I saw my another batchmate, Sonal Agnihotri, disembarking the plane at Bhuj airport when the Indian embassy was getting evacuated. So the situation from 1999 uh, till 2021, it appears that we are back to the square one. I don't know whether this is a mellowed down version of Taliban or the worst is yet to come. But by and large, we believe that there are four issues that world is concerned about. One, as I mentioned during my opening remarks about the geopolitical challenges. This is a remnant of Cold War, but we continue to face the challenges because of that. Second is the global migrant crisis, and it has just begun. Quite possible we'll see the worst. Third is the repercussions in India's border states because of the cross-border terrorism. While the initial remarks of Taliban look affirmative, but the bigger concern is that the person who was responsible for May 2014 Herat attack is now the Home Minister of Afghanistan, Haqqani. So we cannot take these statements at a face value. And the last concern, which is indirect, will there be a trigger of communalism in this country? Because we cannot completely dissociate from Afghanistan as a nation and a culture. And I remember that even till recently, Afghan police were being trained at the National Police Academy when I used to regularly visit as a guest faculty. And I had a chance to interact with the probationers. So we are so closely or emotionally attached with the country that it is just impossible to stay away from the developments in Afghanistan. We just can't say that it's their problem and we will just be concerned about our own national interest. This is an amazing topic for our future, and I'm really thankful to the eminent experts for having accepted the invite today. Look forward to hearing and listening to the golden words of wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patil sir, for those opening remarks. I request the technical team to please play the SOG and the BCS film, which forms one of the very part of our School of Government with respect to the engagements with the youth, what we have, that is the Bharatiya Chhatra Sansad. Over to you, technical team.
MIT School of Government is the first institute to initiate the leadership program in politics and government. After the independence, there was a need to have an institution to train the aspiring politicians or the young leading generation of the country. In 2005, MIT SOG was conceptualized by Rahul V. Karad, the executive president of MIT World Peace University, Pune, with a vision of creating ethical, spirited, and committed political leadership for the country from the grassroots and from all walks of life. Rahul Karad, the founder of MIT School of Government, says that in order to strengthen the democracy, educated young generation must lead the politics. To support his ideology and expand the horizon of the School of Government, he initiated the largest platform of student leaders of the country called Bharatiya Chhatra Sansad or Indian Students' Parliament. A large number of selected student leaders across the country represent in Bharatiya Chhatra Sansad. Till date, more than 2 lakh student leaders are directly or indirectly benefited or are associated with the Students' Enclave. This 3-day program is witnessed by large number of eminent guests from politics, social field, industry, science, spirituality, journalism, etc. Bharatiya Chhatra Sansad is now can be said to be the largest classroom of politically motivated students. MIT School of Government is thus molding the students to empower themselves for knowledge, power, and courage. This is a small contribution of MIT School of Government towards the nation building.
Thank you. I will now request Professor Subbarao sir to have his remarks. Sir is the head of the division for business and leadership. I kindly request Subbarao sir to have his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Professor Gopal. And first of all, I congratulate my entire team of School of Government and School of Public Policy under the guidance of Professor Ravindranath Patilji and Professor Parimal Sudhakar for choosing the right topic at right time. I am privileged to be speaking a few lines in this webinar. We have stalwarts of the subject here. I am not an expert in international relations. Though for several years, I have taught international business. As a business educator and startup promoter, I always look at World Economic Forum annual global risk report for my academic and business analysis guidance. This report is normally released in January every year. This year report is highlighted pandemic and climate change as major risks to international business. I'm keen to know if the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan has brought terrorism as a major risk to global peace, hence global business. As there can be no normal business, no new investments, no greenfield projects without peace. We at MIT World Peace University have a collaborative UNESCO Center on Peace Studies, and we have mainstreamed peace studies into all the subjects, including engineering, management, commerce, law, social sciences. All of us are keen to understand the extent of threat that Afghanistan crisis to regional and world peace. I'm eagerly waiting to listen the golden words from the stalwarts in this field. Thank you for giving this opportunity, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I request the participants to please have their videos on so we can have a group photograph, like this new reality what we have. So may I please request everyone to please have their videos. Thank you. Now it's a privilege for me to introduce Professor Kamalakanta Das, who will be the moderator for the session. Mr. Kamalakanta Das is an assistant professor at School of Public Policy and Management at Shri Shri University and director at the Climate Change and Sustainability Center at Shri Shri University. He is a certified from NIE BUDS and NEN to become an entrepreneur educator. Apart from this, he is also a master trainer in the area of entrepreneurial development, skill development, and CSR and public policy. He has headed various government and international bodies in various capacities. So we are privileged to have Professor Kamalakanta Das, and I request sir to please take it over from here. Over to you, sir. Sir, you're on mute.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
Muni sir, namaste. So thank you everyone for the opportunity. And without wasting any other time, any much time, I would like to introduce Professor S.D. Muni to everyone. He doesn't need any introduction. People who know subject of international relations in this foreign policy, South Asian studies, and someone who has defined the subject, has redefined it at added value, considered as the, you can say him as a, I look at him as a modern father of South Asian studies in India. So I have few questions as I moderate the session for him as well. So Professor Muni is someone who has been a scholar practitioner in that word. He's a scholar who is worldwide known as someone who's contributed extensively for close to half a century on the subject, and has defined the contours of South Asian studies and has given international relations a fantastic space there in India. So he has been there as a distinguished professor in JNU, and I was fortunate to attend his classes in South Asian Studies at the School of International Studies. So he's also a member of IDS's Executive Council, and that there is a long CV. If I can read, that will take another 5 minutes. So Professor Muni is, in one word, is a doyen, is a stalwart, is a contributor, continues to add value and insight into the discussions, especially in his expertise into India's neighborhood relationship. And as I introduce him and invite him to speak on the topic as a keynote speaker, sir, are we falling somewhere, failing somewhere in the context of India not preparing for Afghanistan well? And at the same time, why we do not have centers in Afghanistan studies? Maybe you have headed South Asian studies and taught Afghanistan as well. We don't have many. JNU remains the only beacon of hope at School of International Studies, not many beyond Delhi. So is that our Afghanistan quotient is very low? We don't know. We have a sweeping generalization in television channels. And how do we understand how foreign policy can be democratized? People can participate, and north, south, west, east, we do not have expertise at that level. So you have been our beacon of hope, and you continue to guide us, and how India is going to look at this, but not India, because you are a global citizen who thinks global and acts local. So maybe we will get a perspective from you how international relations are going to shape after Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan. Over to you, Professor Dr. S.D. Muni.
Thank you very much, Professor Dash. I am also grateful to Professor Subba Rao and Professor Patil, who really linked the subject to their own emotional concerns. And I must say that we are all emotionally linked. In fact, one of South Asia's very bright student who got into IFS had to sacrifice his life in Kabul when the attack on the embassy took place. It is a very challenging subject because the whole situation is very fluid. Incidentally, my association with IDSA as an executive council member has come to an end last month, and therefore I want to correct it. I'm no longer with IDSA, but I am a life member, and I have also emotional attachment with IDSA since the days of Reverend K. Subramaniam. Now, as I said, the subject is fluid and it is extremely difficult for us to make definitive judgments or definitive decisions about it. And we must look at the question in things are still developing. The whole issue is what you call a work in progress. Now, the subject is of Pak, Afghanistan and Pakistan. And what is the road ahead? And when you look at, we must understand the Af-Pak relationship, if in the title as we have dealing with it. Now, if in one of the scholarly writings, this relationship was described as tenuous and grudging coexistence. I think it is an apt description of this relationship, that it has all along since 47, with the birth of Pakistan, has remained a tenuous and grudging, with one exception, and now we are entering the second exception. The first exception was between 1997 to 2001, when the Taliban were in power in Kabul there. I think Pakistan and Afghanistan then, or Pakistan and the Kabul regime. Afghanistan includes its people, and they have always had reservations on how to deal with Pakistan. But except for that period, because if you look back into the history, and it is not time to go into the history, recall 1947, Afghanistan had serious reservations in recognizing Pakistan. Afghanistan was the only country which voted at the United Nations against the membership of Pakistan, United Nations. Afghanistan, experienced trade blockade from Pakistan. The Pakistan government did not recognize the Afghanistan government since the Soviet intervention for almost 12 years until 1992. And then, now they have, since 2014, Pakistan has put a double-layered barbed wire fence with Afghanistan all along the Durand line. There are many examples to show how difficult the relationship between the two have been. Now, I said the exception was in 1997 to 2001. And now we are entering another phase of this exception. You can call it second exception, you can call it exception 2.0, when Taliban has again taken control of Afghanistan. But there is a lot of difference. The situation in 1997, late 90s was very different from what it is today. In terms of all the parameters of this relationship, including its geopolitics, and we'll come to it in a short while in different way. What are the issues which make this relationship tenuous and grudging? To begin with, there is a sovereignty issue. And the sovereignty issue is located on the Pashtun area, the Pakhtunistan, in whatever manner you call it. Afghanistan never wanted to see this become a part of Pakistan. And that's the problem which has started with the drawing of Durand Line way back in 1893. In fact, most of the, and that line kept it away, it divided the Pashtun community across the families, across the relationship, and it was not acceptable to them. And till date, though this question has now gone on back burner because of the time and various other factors, but the issue has not been resolved. And the issue remains in the minds and hearts of Pathans, of Pashtun people in a very serious manner. I said Durand Line was the main culprit for that matter, and that was created by the colonial masters. In fact, all the colonial lines are the roots of problems in South Asia. and all the lines drawn by the British, whether it is Durand or let's not go into McMahon and Redcliffe and other lines, but they have all created a bilateral problem. So it created the source. But Pakistan and Afghanistan have not been able to resolve it. The Durand line had, besides Pakhtun issue, other problems also. You know, it was the Afghan delegation said it was almost thrust down their throats. And there was no translation in Dari, which many people in the delegation did not understand. There are various problems about it. So anyway, the first major problem between the two is a question of sovereignty, where Pakistan has serious reservations on the position taken by Afghanistan, and Afghanistan has serious reservations on the Pakhtun area. In fact, when Pakistanis started integrating FATA, a frontier agency, into the Afghans had serious problems about it. And 1952, the Afghans even included Balochistan into their greater Pakhtunistan issue. So they have a very, very serious, very emotional issue about it. The second is of border management. And the border management starts first with the Durand line, but then there are refugees and all kind of illegal crossings between them. There is a movement of terrorists and extremists across the border, which Afghanistan has repeatedly and almost perpetually been complaining. Pakistan is not, I think Pakistan has developed an expertise in the cross-border terrorism. And it is not only against India. The Afghans are facing it to some extent. Many times even Iranians also complain about it. So this is what it is. That again, along the border, there is a whole question of drugs and drug cartels which are moving about it. The economic smuggling which really takes place. Then the question is of transit and trade. Afghanistan, as you know, is a landlocked country, and its access to sea is only via Pakistan. And Pakistan provides it in very, I say, stingy manner. And sometimes it is even blocked. The Karachi route is being blocked, either by the groups like Hikmat Yar in the 90s, sponsored and supported by Pakistan, or by Pakistan itself. And Pakistan wants an access through Afghanistan to the whole of Central Asia. But Pakistan is not willing to give access to Afghanistan to rest of the South Asia, India included, and India is very, very prominent there. Recall the Kathmandu SAARC summit, where the connectivity project was proposed, and all the other South Asian countries were willing to accept it, except Pakistan, because Pakistan did not want Afghanistan to have a very smooth, seamless transit access to India. And this is where the whole SAARC has come into problem. But this is a major issue, and this continues to be there between the two countries. Then there is a question, lastly, of the geopolitical equations, in which Afghanistan has its own equations. It has its own neighbors in Central Asia. It has reasonably good relations with former Soviet Union and later on Russia. It is now developing relations with China in its own mode. The Pakistanis would want to control almost all the geostrategic engagements of Afghanistan, and their whole problem arises. And then there are divisions between between Afghanistan and Pakistan on what kind of geopolitical, geostrategic equations should be there. The biggest is, of course, the India factor. And in this India factor, all the time, the Pakistanis focused on the fact that Afghanistan should not have a good relationship with India. Now, India has old civilizational ties with Afghanistan. You know, the whole question of Kabuliwala was born much before Pakistan was born. And those kind of ties are at the level of the people. So any affection of the Afghan people towards India is not acceptable to Pakistan, and Pakistan tries to block it in several ways. There was a reference to this hijacking, and this was very painful experience for India. But there are new inputs which have come. Hijacking was done by the Pakistani sponsored groups which were based in Afghanistan and based in Pakistan. They were the one who took the hijacking. the Taliban have now come up with an interpretation, in the current context, in which they have said that we, in fact, did not encourage, did not support, did not endorse the kind of act which the Pakistani-based groups had done it. In fact, we facilitated the release of the plane. Now, this is very fascinating in the sense that at a time when Taliban have taken over and when they want to have a reasonably acceptable face to the world, they have come up with incident to explain that in hijacking, and they have sent some messages to India of continuing engagement, that they were really not involved. But India factor is a very critical factor in Afghanistan-Pakistan relationship. Now, these are the major roadblocks, you can call it, in the smooth relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And none of these roadblocks, let us be very clear, none of these roadblocks was seriously addressed and resolved during the happy period of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan during the 90s. From 1997 to 2001, I mean, there was a lot of bonhomies. There were a lot of good equations between them. The Pakistanis trained the Taliban. They even supplied them with the weapons. They supplied them with the money. They politically supported them. There were only two countries who had recognized that regime, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. The whole of the international community had not risen. Now, but none of the major issues which have divided Afghanistan and Pakistan were resolved. Why I am saying this? Because these are the issues which will still be on the table, and I think to some extent would influence what kind of a future relationship the two are having. Now, this kind of an exception which was there, we must see in the light of that exception as to what extent the new exception of you call it the second exception, when the Taliban has taken the assume, Afghanistan appears at the moment in complete grip of Pakistan, and certainly after the formation of the government, the kind of role which the Haqqani network has got into the government making, the way the Pakistan ISI chief, General Hamid, went to Kabul and sorted out the government formation, sorted out the so-called power sharing arrangement, marginalized some of the people who are better exposed to the, clearly shows, and this is what the media is telling, this is what the strategic community is seriously thinking about, that Afghanistan is in the total grip of Pakistan. The question which I am raising here is that really so? Or will it be so for the time to come? They call it an interim government composition. When and how the new government will come, when and how the changes would be made in the interim government is not very clear to anybody else. And there are obviously two phases of this government which has come there. In terms of what you call the rhetorically softer version of their character as to how they want to deal with the international community and regional neighbors, and the real situation on the ground where the internationally acknowledged terrorists are in command of the situation. And not only that, but there is a huge difference also in the foot soldiers on the one hand and the leadership on the other hand. The leadership may be articulating something, but foot soldiers are not trained. They are not acculturated into the moderate or the softer version of governments. So you have this duality in the present government of the soft rhetorics and hard realities. And we have to deal with that kind of a dichotomy which exists, and it is absolutely clear to them. Now, when we say that whether it would be the same Taliban, the new leadership, it's not a new leadership. The Taliban leadership is claiming that we would be different. And besides their claims, there are some other factors which we must keep it in mind. There are, if not very serious, there are very important ideological fault lines in the leadership. You know, the difference when it is easy to get the diverse groups together when you're fighting a common enemy or common adversary, which is what Taliban were doing so far. It is extremely difficult and a different cup of tea to run a government and share power when there is no common enemy in the sight. So I think now what we have there is a situation, and this is where there are ideological differences between whatever the nuanced differences are between Deobandi and Wahhabism. And Wahhabism took over them through Pakistan and Saudi Arabia during the 90s with the kind of support which they have given to Al-Qaeda, the kind of association they even have now with Al-Qaeda will continue to be there. Then there are differences in their regional exposure. There are leaderships which are exposed only to Pakistan. And there is a leadership which is exposed to other international community. They call it simply the Doha Group or the Quetta Shura Group or Peshawar Shura Group or Rahabari Shura Group. These are different ideological formations there. And this would have an impact on their dependence on Pakistan. Because there are people like Baradar, Mullah Baradar, who was arrested for 7 to 8 years by Pakistan and has absolutely sore experiences of what Pakistan can do. And that's why you would saw immediately before formation of the government, there were even a statement saying that we would not accept interference from any country, and some people added including Pakistan. Not only at the popular level, where there were protests against Pakistan's interference in Panjshir Valley and others, but even otherwise there is a problem. So there are differences from what we thought Taliban earlier was. I think earlier there was a little more cohesiveness. They were raw group. Pakistan was training them. Pakistan was pumping them. Now they are the people who have had experience of the past 20 years of fighting in one form or the other. And they also have the experience of losing their government in the 1990s and how alienating and antagonizing an international community which did not let them. Now, to these divisions, I think to a very large extent, the role of the international community would decide as to how much their dependence upon the Taliban's dependence on Pakistan would continue to be. And to my mind, for the international community at large, and particularly India, the more dependent the Taliban are from Pakistan, the better it is for India. And any regime in Kabul, which has been independent of Islamabad, which has been independent of the military and the intelligence setup, security setup in Pakistan, has always been preferred by us, has always been good to us, has always been more moderate, more soft in whatever manner you want, more representative of the Afghan people. So in the present context, if, for instance, if today the international community, like during the 1990s, and there are two, your subtitle says road ahead, and I see there are two directions, there are two roads ahead, in fact. The one road is that international community is capable and fully equipped to destabilize Taliban, this government. There is no doubt about that. With these divisions within the Taliban, with the kind of Khorasan group which exists there, the TTP which exists there, Northern Alliance which exists there, the financial constraints and the problems which this regime is facing. There is a food crisis, there is a financial crisis. But it can create a hell lot of a problem for the Taliban regime. And even at present, almost $7 to $9 billion which has been blocked up. The Pakistan's access to, the Afghanistan's access to international finances, which they have their own finances, is creating a problem. And this is, I think, one of the biggest pressure which is there on the Taliban in order to become more, more acceptable, more accommodative. So by exploring the internal fault lines in various ways, and I am not going into the, we do not know the details of what the CIA director and the Russian National Security Advisor has had discussions in New Delhi with the National Security Advisor of Delhi, what kind of assessment which they are having. But the international, US included, Europe included, the international community is capable of destabilizing Taliban, but it is not capable, again, let me underline, it is not capable of uprooting them. And this is where we must be very clear of the constraints on the international community, that the Americans tried it for 20 years, howsoever half-heartedly they worked, but this is what they could not do. So the hard reality is that, yes, Afghanistan can be destabilized. The Taliban regime can be destabilized, which means Afghanistan would be destabilized, which would mean whole of South Asia would be destabilized. And all the regions, Central Asian republics also, where there are common boundaries and common ethnic contiguities, will also be destabilized on one. And that is possible, which can keep this regime, if it becomes repressive, on the toes. But then it will also result into pushing that regime largely into the lap of Pakistan continuously. It is possible that China comes to their support, but there are severe constraints on to what extent China can take care of financial and all other, and would be willing to do that. Because in all statements which the Chinese making, apparently appear to be very friendly to the Taliban, but there is always a line of caution that the Taliban have to behave in a normal manner. They would not prefer, they are themselves worried about the Uyghur and the Xinjiang problem. So the one option, one direction of the road for international community is that if Taliban does not behave, it has the capacity to destabilize and keep the pot boiling. To what extent it is in the interest of the region you can keep your fingers crossed. The second road is that the international community can have a calibrated engagement with Taliban. And calibrated engagement would amount to having, give and take and continuous reciprocity. We do this, you do this, we do this, you do this. The Taliban understand that language. The fact that Americans had got into a written agreement with Taliban, it is so unfortunate that Americans, out of their total wits for leaving Afghanistan, they had an agreement with Taliban, not with the Afghan government. And that agreement was almost a total surrender of what Taliban really wanted. But anyway, the calibrated engagement for the international community could be that this is what we expect. And it would be very interesting, see very carefully the latest statement which has been issued by the religious chief Akhund on Taliban's attitude to the international community, in which they repeated underlined that we will have very friendly relations with the neighbors. We do not want to create any problem for them. We will not allow the terrorist groups to go in there. We want to have normal relations with the international community. We want to have trade. We want to go to the United Nations, whatever else it is. So there is a long statement outlining the Taliban's approach to the world outside. The underlying message of that, that statement is that we will be accommodative to the international community. Don't disturb us on internal matters. They have made no commitments on the human rights. They have human rights in general, but no commitments on women, no commitment on what kind of freedoms they would permit. They are not talking about. So I think this is the kind of a message. And to begin with, the international community will have to take it on the face value. But is it possible to have a calibrated engagement in which you have constraints and you have windows of contacts and engagement open with the Taliban. I think it is possible. I think it should be tried at least, given an attempt to begin with, and see in a month or two, maybe in a year, maybe in 6 months, whether Taliban are shaping in a different way or not. Because I further underline that Taliban's independence from Pakistan is critical to the stability of Afghanistan and the stability of the whole region. Now, lastly, therefore, I think it is in India's interest also that international community starts a calibrated engagement, which will suit India's long-term interest. While doing so, I think India must do one thing. So far, to my understanding, so far, India's Afghanistan policy has been enslaved by two factors. One, obsession with Pakistan, and secondly, total dependence on the US. And to a very large extent, India's Afghan policy has got to be liberated from these two constraints. We should not excessively be obsessed with whatever the Pakistan does, we have to do it against it. Have no mistake and no illusion that Pakistan also faces a severe dilemma in dealing with Taliban and Afghanistan. It is not an easy road for them, and they fear that that Taliban who were housed in Pakistan territory were more dependent upon them. A Taliban which has a whole state under their control would be less dependent upon them, or would want to be less dependent upon them. The Pakistanis realize that. The Pakistanis also realize that there are a host of issues which I listed earlier, which they will have to face upon them. Therefore, India's policies should moderate itself on the Pakistan obsession on the one hand, and moderate itself, not disjunct itself on the total dependence on American or the NATO approach to Afghanistan. I am glad we have started, reinforcing our dialogue process with countries like Russia and Iran, and we are also in touch with some of the Doha, including Qatar. And we must also, we are doing that, but we must strengthen that. Our contact points with the fault lines, ideological fault lines among the Taliban. So the groups which appear to be moderate and which can be cultivated should be cultivated, and groups which need not be cultivated should not be cultivated. And while doing that, we have to prepare for the possible thrust and pressure on the terrorist front from the groups which are very adversarial to India. Our CDC, the Chief of Defense Staff, said very clearly that we can manage all the terrorist pressures in Kashmir or various other areas. Wish him well. I think we can manage. But on the same time, at the same front, it is necessary for us to resolve our internal problems on two fronts. One, the alienation of Kashmir, for whatever extent it is, we must try and bridge it. And secondly, should not help any polarization along communal lines within India, which will have a more adversarial reaction or which will give greater legitimacy to the forces which are adversarial to us and will be pampered by Pakistan with the so-called strategic depth of Afghanistan. I don't see much of a chance of the so-called strategic depth developing, but these are the aspects which we must keep it in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Muni, for outlining the India's action points. And do we see any possibility that India will have the leveraging point against Pakistan to expose Pakistan's complicity in extending support in military action against the Panjshir Valley? So that remains to be seen. And United Nations Security Council seems to be sitting ducks and not doing anything rather than issuing statements. So those challenges will definitely be there. And but you have laid out a fantastic roadmap and well calibrated how we can perhaps look at this issue, which is evolving each minute kind of thing, each hour. And with that fluidity, with that unpredictability, with that strategic interest, geostrategic interest of India, India has maybe ideally adopted wait and watch policy and slowly engaging with its own sphere of influence and possible partners. So maybe if you can respond to one or two these observations that whether international law is capable enough to act upon Pakistan, which is actually sitting on a grey list on the Financial Action Task Force. That is one. Can we say that this has supported a terrorist regime in Afghanistan, intervened again when there is a civil war, and actually bombarded where if there are enough evidence to prove? So will India be playing any role in exposing Pakistan's double speak on terrorism and supporting terrorism in Afghanistan? Sir, over to you.
Well, I hope that international community is capable of exercising the pressure in theoretical battles. I don't see it has happened so far. In fact, everybody has been looking towards Pakistan for access to Afghanistan, for access to Taliban. And they continually depend in negotiations, in talks, discussions. In the last call of 3 or 4 countries, US had Pakistan on the table, not India. International communities, legal pressures will act, but to what extent they can be decisive, I have my own fingers crossed. You mentioned about Panjshir. Panjshir, look, India was not militarily involved in Afghanistan in this phase at all, at any level. The countries which could have been involved, and I would say Russia, did not help the Panjshir group. The whole international community has come to the conclusion that they have not said it in so many words, that maybe this Taliban is different from the previous Taliban. Maybe is a big word. And as a result of that, they are all trying to keep an engagement with the Taliban. How come, I mentioned to you earlier, how come the US starts negotiating with this terrorist group? Therefore, helping Northern Alliance, in fact, Northern Alliance was in a pitiable situation in Panjshir. They should not have really gone to that extent because it was impracticable with all the international attitude which was there and all the support on the Taliban side, with all the Afghan forces surrendering them. You know, somewhere else, yesterday I was talking there, I said people are talking about great Taliban victory. Great Taliban victory, yes, but it is a constrained victory. It is a constrained victory because they did not have to fight. The Afghan forces surrendered to them, almost like 1971 when the Pakistani forces surrendered to India. Imagine if Niazi had fought in Dhaka, they would have still taken we would have taken a lot of time to see Bangladesh emerge as an independent country. Similarly, the Taliban have had a cakewalk. So they did not fight. And the international community wanted it that way. How could Ghani get out of the country without the support of some sections in the international community? So the India alone should not be held responsible. India did not have any military role in Afghanistan, could not have played a role in Panjshir. Panjshir is even geographically, in fact, it is the Central Asian republics which have a greater role in Panjshir. So I find that it was not practically possible for India to go into that. And international community's attitude today is still very vague and confused so far as Taliban is concerned. And we have to see to some extent, when I'm saying calibrated, I'm also saying have a dual approach. Encourage possibility of Taliban becoming an independent force in Afghanistan, number one. Number two, ensure that Taliban becomes a moderate independent force in Afghanistan rather than an extremist independent force in Afghanistan. I mean, these are big ifs. I'm not saying that this will happen. I have serious doubts in the culmination of it, but under the situation, I think we must attempt that, explore the possibility.
Thank you, Professor Muni, for that enlightening presentation and passionately arguing for the possibilities in international relations, in diplomacy, in India's foreign policy, looking at regional security and the partners and neighbors involved in that quagmire of politics that has happened here. So thank you, Professor Muni. We would request from on our organizer behalf, if you can spare a little bit of time and stay there and contribute also, that would be great contribution.
I will try and stay.
Right. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for setting the tone. And also, I'm going to request Professor Anuradha Chenoy, after you to start the discussion, where you ended the discussion. You said Central Asian countries have a major possibility of saying something and doing something as well, including Russia. So Professor Anuradha Chenoy doesn't need any introduction to people who follow international relations. And she is a former dean at the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has been chairperson of Area Studies Director in the Center for Russian Central Asian Studies. She has written several books, monographs, and articles in the domain of security studies, development studies, gender studies, area studies, international relations, Russian studies. She has held several consulting and appointments at the International Committee of Red Cross, UNESCO, ActionAid, International Women Peacekeepers. So she has also evaluated the work of organizations like Focus on the Global South and Asia-Europe People's Forum. So someone who continues to contribute into public space, into discussions on international relations and regional studies. May I request Professor Anuradha Chenoy to make her presentation. Over to ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, very honored to be here, and especially speak after my own guru, Professor Muni, my friend. And I was delighted to hear your director say that, that MIT SOG is involved in so much of peace studies also. That's a subject very close to my own heart, on which I do quite a lot of work also. So today, your topic of what to do with AF-Pak, if I can just make a comment first on this topic itself, I can tell you the Afghan people don't like this term AF-Pak. They are very nationalist. Even the Taliban, we don't consider it a progressive nationalism, it's a religious extremist force, but it is very clear on its sovereignty. The Russians and others don't like AF-Pak, only the Pakistanis like it, and very often, many in the Indian international community term it like this. This was especially so before the Americans took over. So I will not really be using that term. What my first argument is that how is Afghanistan being framed? Is it just a geostrategic problem where every power, from the colonial to the imperialists to the regional, whether it's Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, the Saudis, are they primarily concerned either with hegemony or only their own security at the cost of others' security? Now, if you frame it only as a geostrategic problem, my argument is that this is a continuation of colonial knowledge construction and colonial policy. So my second point, therefore, is that do we also see the human aspects, the humanitarian crisis, the spillover of fundamentalisms, the spillover of violence, oppression of women and minorities? So, and then my third point, and I'm going to do it point-wise because I have 10 minutes, I was told, is about the geopolitical interventions. These interventions and imperialism is not just of the US, but also of regional players. And in this, I would argue that there was a Russian intervention, there is Pakistan, Iran, and almost all of them. And all these, they use these interventions, they superimpose them on domestic, local, Afghan, ethnic rivalries in Afghanistan. And they have created this tragedy which is unfolding in this region across decades now. So it's critical to see Afghanistan holistically and not just as a geostrategic game for world powers. And I think India and maybe Southeast Asia are some of the countries which have seen it more holistically than others, though sometimes they have had their own linkages and prisms, as Professor Muni cited, and I will go into later. My fourth point is really to show the repeat pattern which has been happening in Afghanistan and which continues. And that is, very quickly, one, British colonialism used Afghanistan as a buffer between Russia's southward advance and British colonial possessions in India in the 19th century, ending in the Russian Afghan Border Commission or Russian British Border Commission of 1885, if you see the documents. Second, the Russians used intervention in Afghanistan to fortify their own security positions during the Cold War and to uphold a failing and faction-ridden pro-Soviet Afghan regime. The perceived oppression there of Islam and the government, communist government of Dawood, led to the rise of Islamic nationalism, of political Islam, and the creation of the Taliban and the Mujahideen. Remember, in Pakistan had 36,000 seminaries training the Mujahideen. So it was the same factory of the Mujahideen who created the Taliban. And this continues. And with this, a massive inflow of arms, mercenaries, private security, the rise of poppy cultivation. Those who followed Afghanistan will know how the UN and the US bombed acres of poppy cultivation for it only to grow back within 6 months. The illegal opium trade and the Russian withdrawal in 1989 was seen as a major geostrategic victory by the US, the Pakistan and US allies. They termed it the Russian Vietnam, etc. Then, when the pro-Russian, independent regime of Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, the US again sought revenge for the 9/11 attacks. But here I would argue, and you can see it in all the documents coming out now from the US, and especially in Washington Post, that the US interest in Afghan was marginal. Their real interest was restructuring West Asia. It was a dangerous game, and there were two wars at that time. That in taking over Afghanistan, which was secondary, the primary was Iraq and then Syria. Of course, the US hit some of the Al-Qaeda bases and that terror group, but they also knew that Al-Qaeda was primarily in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which they ignored. But this was advantageous for the US's own geostrategic desire to reconstruct West Asia and for the simultaneous interventions. Now, when US has withdrawn, who sees it as a victory? Again, Pakistan. So Pakistan saw it as a victory in 1989, and now again in 2021, it's a constant. So you can see the clever geopolitics of Pakistan and why the Afghan people are against Pakistan. They have been a constant in intervention in the sovereignty of Afghanistan. Next, there are also the regional powers, and their conflicts and militarisms have come into constant play in Afghanistan. So if Pakistan was a key to the ideological nurturing of the Taliban, at that time, India supported, or at least not physically, but of course, emotionally, they supported the Northern Alliance. The US versus Iran and Iraq played out in Afghanistan. Iran's long border with Afghanistan was a cause for regional tensions and to various Taliban groups. Saudi Arabia and Turkey's search for regional influence played out in Afghanistan. The Central Asian states, and you wanted me to focus on that, the main concern of Russia throughout, and especially now, is about the possibility of religious extremism entering Russia and Central Asia, and they are the most likely to be affected along with South Asia, India especially. And why? Number one, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Turkmenistan all have borders, but leave alone borders with Afghanistan. they are fairly autocratic regimes, and the opposition there are Islamic movements, like the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which is a main opposition to this autocratic regime in Uzbekistan. And this Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, and yesterday, even in Russia, the Caucasus, Chechnya, some of the areas in the Baltics where there are, religious extremist underground movements which are opposing the Russian regime, which are opposing the local regime. Yesterday, they came out in support of the Taliban. They welcomed Taliban victory, whereas Russia and all the Central Asian countries have been very, very cautious and very concerned. But the other thing is that Russia mans the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan with its 201st Motorized Division. And so there is great concern about the spread of religious extremism, about the poppy trade, about opium, about trafficking, which can carry on. So that is as far as Central Asia and Russia is concerned. China, as Professor Muni very correctly put it, I think they are the real neo-colonial economic power, which is looking for entry if there is a stable Afghanistan. And I'll tell you why. America spent $2 trillion. Of course, only 4% of that $1 trillion went to the Afghan people. The rest was on security, on the American army, on the so-called Afghan forces, which melted away in 2 weeks. So people didn't benefit. But so why did America spend this $2 trillion? Mainly for West Asia, for Iraq, etc. Afghanistan, they could not take out any money or any resources from Afghanistan. And that is also one of the reasons they have left. So it's not a classic imperialism case. It's a case of asserting American hegemony in West Asia, in Asia, North Asia, etc. So whereas the Chinese, they're interested in this spec, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and they will uphold the Taliban as long as they allow China to enter and they get economic benefits only. Of course, the classic model always is that flag follows trade. Earlier in colonial time, it was trade following flag. That means, the army would come, make space for trade. But now, and you can see this from the Chinese model, they will first have trade and then they will have some military to protect this. But remember, what they want from Afghanistan is basically raw material and lithium, as was cited earlier, but this requires 13, 14 years of economic investment. So yes, China will give assistance and they believe in unconditional assistance. So they will not ask for human rights, etc., like liberal democracies do. They will give it some assistance to stabilize Taliban, but they also do not want a spillover of conflict to their own Xinjiang and other regions. So no one is interested in this spillover of conflict, except perhaps Pakistan. But this conflict can spill over to Pakistan. And I think Professor Muni was completely right, because there is a Pakistan Taliban, and there is a Pashtun issue, which is very critical for Pakistan. And they do not want one Pashtunistan, which is, there's a nationalist, sub-nationalism in Pashtunistan, which Pakistan is very, very over. So if they use, fundamentalist forces, including the Haqqani network, the Daesh, the IS, which are all there and want a role in the pie, it's a double-edged sword for Pakistan itself. So this has been the pattern, and what we fear now as this pattern can continue. And I'll get on to the last part of this. Like, how can this pattern continue? One, you can see from the US has not fully disengaged. Since it withdrew, it's bombed twice. It is looking for new military bases around that area. They're asking Kyrgyzstan, which earlier had both Russian and US military bases, just less than 50 miles from each other. So they would, Turkmenistan can give them a base again. They had it earlier also. They're asking India for their logistic support. So they're looking for new military bases and re-engagement from a different kind of way. Their geostrategists, truckloads of them, are working on this. Then their domestic discourse is again about defeat, hegemony, and how to curb China. So they will support Taliban to curb China, if possible. Pakistan may not oblige the US with bases, but they would work along with China and be the major, they would like to be the major advisors for Taliban, but I think this would be temporary. The Taliban would want to assert their own sovereignty. Russia is concerned with its own security and influx of political Islam and religious extremism into Central Asia and into the Caucasus in Russia. Already, as I told you, Caucasus groups have welcomed the Taliban, but nonetheless, they will have a transactional relation like China with the Taliban, where they will give it assistance in return that there is no export of security. Now, can Taliban control that? Can they control the ISIS and the Daesh and the Haqqani network? Because the Taliban want domestic control. They're not interested in spreading global jihad, which the ISIS and the Daesh, Haqqani network, Al-Qaeda, etc. are interested in. So there is a contradiction there already. Pakistan, of course, sees it as a strategic depth and mainly as a victory against India. But they will support China's entry into Afghanistan. So really, what is the solution and what should be India's role? India has invested almost $1 billion in Afghanistan and on good projects. They were building the Afghan parliament. They were getting scores, as all of us know, we've given lectures to all these areas. They were getting students and their civil servants and those in institutions for training and capacity building. Groups like SEVA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, were working in Kabul, training women. So that is why a large number of Afghan people are very sympathetic for relations with India, and India needs to build it. But what should India's position be? One, Professor Muni talked of calibrated position. I would say, extend it to say, it should be calibrated. India's development assistance, by the way, has traditionally been non-conditional. They say, because we also have this thing about not intervening in sovereignty. But I think there's time for a transition. India's approach should be not only calibrated, it should be conditional, it should be accountable, and there should be a deep studies of Afghanistan to see what is happening at the various levels, at the level not just of the government and factions within, but minorities, women, people to people, agriculture, etc. So, and I agree, India's prism should not be geostrategic entirely. Of course, they have to watch their geostrategy, and security issues and terrorism is a major issue, but it should be liberated from just seeing it through Pakistan and and linking up entirely with the US. I think this position of talking with Russia is very important. It's critical, in fact, because this will give India strategic autonomy in the region. And India needs to have a moral position also, like it did earlier, in which they assist students, the refugees, and not just, one category of refugees that, okay, we'll take in, according to religious minorities. They should also take in people from civil society and those Afghans who are generally under threat for having opposed the Taliban. They should be very clear on the drugs issue. they should support UN drugs administration on making sure, because remember, in the last few years, the Taliban and the Afghan government benefited from the drug trade. 90,000 tons of poppy opium was cultivated and exported illegally. So Afghanistan can become the first, excuse me, legal narco state power. So India really has to have the high moral ground of ensuring pluralism, minority rights, and moving away from the geostrategic approach to a human security approach. And this is where I'll end today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Anuradha Manchenerji. You gave a human touch to the foreign policy, and you asked at the end that why strategic approach, strategic security approach needs to be kind of factored into a human security approach, and also advocating for engaging with neighbors of Afghanistan, including powers like Russia. So it is very important that discussion is happening. So from where we will be transitioning and going to our next speaker, who will be perhaps speaking about a connection with China. The recent news, which is at 12:01, just 15 minutes ago, it says, China welcomes end of anarchy in Afghanistan, pledges $31 million aid, and urges Taliban to restore order. So this is the news item. So that means China will have a bigger stake, not just about business, but also in bringing stability and order, maybe in what we talked about, the reconstruction and rebuilding again, perhaps what the United States talked about in 2001 onwards. So we'll go back to China as well. Thank you, Professor Anuradha Chanerjee, and we'll request you to, if you can stay till the Q&A, and also your opinion and insights and comments would be adding a lot of value, and also to our broader understanding as well. Thank you for bringing that insight, which was happening around Afghanistan, nearby countries, and the perspective from India as well. So thank you for that insightful intervention. Over to, may I request Dr. Arvind Elri, Senior Fellow at Peking University. At Peking University, he leads the research on China, India, South Asia economic engagements as a special focus, and conducts research on comparative aspects of China and South Asia ties. He holds a doctoral degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Elri's research interests include China's foreign policy, Chinese business, Chinese manufacturing trends, urbanization, Chinese government and politics. He contributes on China-related issues in a number of Indian and international newspapers and magazines and journals. Before joining PKU, Arvind worked at the Institute of Chinese Studies in the capacity of Assistant Director and Associate Fellow. May I request Arvind Elri to take over?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Das. Thank you so much. And I also thank MIT School of Government and Public Policy for inviting me for this stellar program. First of all, I mean, being located out of Pune, such debate should also happen out of Delhi. And that is, I think, I should start on that congratulatory note, that the program has been, built on a good capacity. It was a privilege to listen to our professors, Professor S.D. Muni and Professor Chenoy, whom we were students. They did not teach us directly, but yes, we kept on hearing, participating in different programs where they kept on helping us understand the broader canvas of about South Asia, and so on and so forth. I will not be speaking on China specifically because I think it's the larger domain, how these events in Afghanistan are unfolding, and how those will have larger impact on the region. That is very important. As Professor Muni was pointing out, the different stakeholders, their stakes, and how these different stakeholders should come to the table and discuss practically the threats and prospects of engaging on Afghanistan. Professor Chinoy also mentioned about, the framing of Afghanistan has been at the core of the problem. Because traditionally Afghanistan was thought to be one of the important place at the geopolitical crossroads between the two superpowers and then the great powers, who try to influence the regional politics in South Asia, especially in Afghanistan. So you will see that there are forces, there are forces and counter forces of thoughts, forces and counter forces of the activity on the ground. That is somewhere the whole issue of Afghanistan becomes very interesting. Russia abandoning, US abandoning, and as Professor Chinoy was hinting, that if any country which is interested in Afghanistan, apart from Pakistan, is China. So certainly, there are a lot of interest generated by the recent takeover by Afghanistan and withdrawal of United States. And now how that is going to evolve and come forward and create crisis is something which every one of us in South Asia and also regionally and globally should contemplate. Now, most importantly, I think what I'm going to put forth over here is when we look at Afghanistan, as I said in the beginning of my small note over here, that the role of Afghanistan has to be seen from the regional as well as the international political fabrics. And I think the important points which I want to bring forth is about the economy. I would not talk like an econometrician, but I think mostly I'll be talking like political economist. If you look at as the earlier speakers have pointed out, the economy is in a real threat. And by Taliban taking over here, the chances of, if any value addition or robustness of the economy has gone into the doldrums. And that really threats the rise and the sustenance of the Afghan economy. Anyway, for past few years, the pandemic and earlier situation, the economy was not really performing optimally. It was performing, at the bare on its bare minimum skeleton. Why so? Because I think in past 20 years of US domination or occupation of Afghanistan, the US says that they have given the aid. IMF and the world global financial institutions claim that they have invested so much of funds in constructing or maybe making the Afghanistan's economy robust. But if you take the indexes or if you take the standards of performances on which the Afghanistan's economy sustenance can be measured, that is with regard to rule of law, or that is with regard to the government of governance, or whether that is with regard to the regulatory efficiency, and in the end, the open markets. Would this thrive in the post-Ghani period or in the Taliban rule of Afghanistan? And there are clear-cut indications that we won't be seeing any robustness as far as the openness of the economy is concerned, the formation of government, and then the governance. And again, a big question put over there. Rule of law is, again, I think, openly uncontested topic. There is one thing which is at stake in Afghanistan to start with, is a rule of law. So given all these four important points, one can analyze that the national economy, would be needing a serious relook by the leaders. Now, I'm taking a very objective view over here. I'm not giving Talibanis the benefit of doubt, neither I wanted to give a benefit of doubt to the earlier government under Ghani. If you look at the important part in past 5 decades, the conflict under Soviet Russia, and then the Taliban government, and again under US, you would say that the gross national product, the GNPs, the major chunk of the GNP has been formed in military assistance and economic assistance, which were extended to Afghanistan. And that range anywhere between 20 to 45% in past 4 and 5 decades. Now, if this percentage is going to drop. And if that is a constructive step, thinking that, Taliban would not need any military assistance and there won't be any military assistance. And if there might be opinion and debate that, it's a political step, it's a good constructive step, that may be illusionary thought, because involvement of Pakistan, involvement of China, somewhere underlines that the important component of the Afghan's national economy would still be of international military and economic assistance. That somewhere, puts a fact clearly in front of us that, the challenge for the Afghan national economy is to overcome these challenges. Secondly, as it was pointed out by the earlier speaker about the agriculture. Agriculture is also an important source. And for example, if agriculture was, a rudimentary way of the Afghans, or their contribution to livelihood, and to contribute toward the national economy, the agriculture contributed somewhere about 4 to 5% of national economy, approximately about $800 million. Starting 1819, it became consistent, but in 2020, it dropped. The problem with the agriculture over here is, no matter, again, what Professor Chinoy mentioned about, bombing of the cultivation grounds for opium, that cultivation is going to pick up again. It is not just the table grapes or the raisins which are going to help the Afghanistan, but then essentially, as it was noted by the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, that 80% of global opium comes and heroin comes from Afghanistan and originates from Afghanistan. If that is the case, if there are figures, digits saying that there will be a rise of agriculture, because that is what's going to happen. People are going to go back to cultivation, and especially the opium cultivation. That's a major threat to the region, not only to Afghanistan. Importantly, in past few years, it was also seen that as the economy was trying to overcome some of the worst tragedies and complexes, the overseas Afghans were trying to believe or have the faith in the fragile but generated economy. And then the remittances were also growing. The remittances played an important role. Now, if you see that if Taliban are coming and taking over Afghanistan, that means that there would be a sharp drop in remittances. Why remittances are important is not only from the economic point of view, but also indicate that there is growing to be a growing lack of faith of overseas Afghans in Afghanistan or in Taliban, which means the Afghanistan economy will lose a major chunk of its income if that faith evaporates somewhere. Now, someone who keeps studying China every day and more frequent, I think I am ought to speak on China for a couple of minutes. Post American withdrawal from Afghanistan, China is ready to take the center stage. I think that is not a new, any new invention, or that is not a new fact anywhere. I'm trying to point it over here. What I'm trying to point out over here is that when the US forces were in Afghanistan, or maybe the Russian forces were in Afghanistan, there was a contest in Afghanistan. India was investing in various infra projects. There was no singularity, or the contest was not singular, okay? Because there was no polarizing, there was not at all any polarizing of thinking. As Professor Muni said, since there is no common enemy now, that's a real problem. Earlier, there were contests, there were debates, and actually that helped somewhere avoiding the polarizing of moral and foreign policy making. But what happened is, post American withdrawal and Taliban's taking power, you would see a new kind of polarization taking place in Afghanistan, and China does not want to lose an opportunity to dominate this important choice. Despite this situation, China is extremely wary, as Russia is wary of rising fundamentalism or economic or the religious extremism in Afghanistan. China is also equally worried of this thing. Though Taliban has said that they want to join, they will be happy to join BRI. They want to welcome the Chinese to bring in the investments. But again, the investments, even if Afghanistan is called the Saudi Arabia of lithium, or maybe $1 trillion worth of rare earths or minerals deposits in Afghanistan. It takes a quite long period to get an access, produce, and get the profits break even. Meanwhile, China has to face the menace of Taliban on its western frontiers, Central Asia and Xinjiang. And at the same time, also to control Taliban, because Taliban are nationalistic, yes, but actually, essentially, they are the Pakhtuns, who would only barter, would only have the terminal interest in dealing with China. So the problem of China is that how Taliban would have a strategic interest in engaging with China, and that is a major problem the China have in Afghanistan, and China do not have the wherewithal or the stockpile of a strategic mindset, an idea, or a framework through which they would constructively engage. Constructively is not a formative phrase over here, but ways through which they can, access and talk or engage with Afghanistan. So that is a main issue over here. So in conclusion, I would be saying that the way the challenge for Afghanistan is to manage its economy, because there is a rising challenge of this non-strategic threats, rising. I think more than the other countries, it is the stakeholder within the Afghanistan has to look after some of these niche areas to develop the best solutions to that. Taliban do not look, in a mindset, or do not see, fitting taking this consideration forward. So in the conclusion, my concluding statement would be that the notion of value-based foreign policy has vanished. And it has given opportunities to the different polarizing times where the neighboring countries are trying to destabilize, because the stabilization and destabilization would keep on happening, the way the domino effects take place. And I think that has a major challenge for the whole region, not only for Afghanistan. And I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Arvind, for providing us an economic perspective of the crisis. And that is very important, because as we grapple with the magnitude of the issue, we need to understand Afghanistan very well, and from inside of it, which means social, political, economic, and all those aspects, and international trade as well. So you provided a kind of a regional perspective and also a national perspective from Afghanistan's economic possibilities, including the challenges in the poppy trade and heroin and all that, and what can actually happen. So thank you for that important intervention there. And we have to see how Taliban actually, what is the road ahead for Taliban also, because as we are looking at AF-Pak and for road ahead for India. So let's look at what is road ahead for Taliban as well. Thank you for that. And we are actually rushing against time in any way. So may I request Dr. Mahidul Islam to make his presentation. And Mahidul Islam, I will be briefly introducing him. He's an assistant professor of political science, and having a PhD from University of Oxford, who has studied at Jawaharlal University in Center for Political Studies, has extensively written on issues that are important to the communities, Muslim communities, and has got extensive experience of teaching, writing, researching, and consulting in the areas of South Asia, international relations, and focusing on the Muslim community as well. So his book, Indian Muslims After Liberalization and Limits on Islamism, have been highly appreciated. So with this short introduction, may I request Dr. Professor Mahidul Islam to start his presentation.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Das. So it's a pleasure and a privilege to talk among great stalwarts like Professor S.D. Putti and Professor Anuradha Chinoy. I was, of course, not a student of international studies in JNU, but in CPAs, but I was also quite watchful towards them and always discussing with my other friends from international studies the kind of research and teaching that they were doing in the university. Now, what I'm going to do is to focus that why we are actually here, like why is this mess is there, which has not been discussed so much in this symposium so far. Now, one is that it's very much a kind of a puzzle for a lot of us that why Taliban were still able to sustain for 20 years of this long 20 years and still able to sustain themselves and then recapture Kabul and the entire country. Now, the one, of course, the biggest flaw was certainly that of the US foreign policy, which particularly after Iraq war, lost the narrative in the domestic realm, because there was no justification for Iraq war. There was no weapons of mass destruction, and there was kind of a wrongfully connected Al-Qaeda with Iraq, with Saddam Hussein regime, which has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. Now, once the narrative is lost at the domestic front, and particularly during the Obama administration, there was a lot of drone attacks which was continuing in Afghanistan. A lot of civilian casualties also happening. So the kind of civilian casualties actually created a condition when a section of Afghan society were actually happily joining Taliban. So that is one kind of supply kind of mechanism which was going on. The second thing was that the Afghan National Army, which was being trained by the US, also lacked a kind of ideological cohesiveness, a kind of ideological coherence in kind of fighting whom. So let's say you are an Afghan, but you are being trained by a colonial occupation army, and then you are fighting your fellow brethren who are largely Pashtuns. So you have Taliban, which is very much a kind of a lot of Pashtun brethren you are here. So this is a kind of a problem that we also find today when the Americans actually gone out, and within few weeks, the entire Afghan National Army just surrendered. There was hardly any kind of resistance to Taliban. So this is something which is also we need to understand that this was a hugely flawed kind of US foreign policy towards Afghanistan. And as everybody knows that Afghanistan has been a graveyard of empire, and the Soviets did a huge mistake, and the United States also did a huge mistake. Now, in this context, I'm completely agreeing with Professor Muni that our foreign policy has to be detached from US foreign policy, because throughout South Asia, in trying to counter both China and Pakistan, we did not quite innovate our own independent foreign policy. We were very much within the bandwagon of US. We were very much going towards the US kind of line. So this is something which we need to now rethink and recalibrate our own foreign policy in terms of formulating our own independent foreign policy. So it's a good sign that we are actually talking to both Iran and Russia, and of course, but we also need to rebuild our relationships with the Central Asian countries, as Professor Chinoy was also saying, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. These are very strategic countries as far as overseeing the entire region and as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Now, there is another issue which is now being talked, and I think we need to be cautious about China, because China is very much an expert of dealing with countries which do not have liberal democratic institutions. It has actually dealt with several African autocrats in terms of having more trade relations and kind of making it a real kind of investments for Chinese companies to invest, buy lands in East Africa. That's number one. It has also made the similar kinds of deals with Myanmar or Thailand, that kind of thing, and its presence in South Asia is emerging. And I would say that given the new news that Professor Dash was making, that the first Chinese bailout package, let's say. And this has happened with Pakistan also. China also did the same thing with Imran Khan government. There's now a bailout package, and people are saying that Pakistan is almost like a colony. So China will be actually very crucial. It's also good. It's also from the Chinese point of view, the Belt and Road Initiative that they are now making, and the kind of rejuvenation of the old Silk Route. Afghanistan is a absolutely a huge good news for them in terms of strategic importance, and the $1 to $3 trillion of mineral resources as far as the U.S. Geologist survey recently. You have huge copper and iron ore and lithium, zinc, and earth metals reserves in Afghanistan. China will be very much interested. Except which there is a concern that except that there is a kind of a tendency for the East Turkmenistan Islamic movement to have some kind of liaison with the Uyghur Muslims in Western China. If Taliban promises to kind of contain some kind of a kind of promise that they will contain this East Turkmenistan Islamic movement, then I think China will be hugely appreciating to this regime. And given the fact that now the Taliban are one of the questions in the chats is that now the Taliban is now more poor, let's say. I think the Taliban strategy in the next few years, if this government in this kind of government stays in another, let's say within a year, we will know, then it will actually balance between the poppy trade, which will be a short-term tactical kind of revenue generation, and the long-term strategic kind of approach for realizing the mineral resources, which needs a kind of more stable regimes, which needs a 10 years, 20 years kind of a investment. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is this Taliban, because of its practical reasons, will actually be more inimical to the Chinese kind of relations and do trade with them and exploring the mineral resources. This is number one. But at the philosophical level, I think that what happened today, or what we are in this, is a kind of a not only graveyard for empire, but also the graveyard of the very ideals of liberty and equality that, let's say, 200 years back in 1789, the French Revolution, and later on the 19th century, the century of Mill and Marx. And I will say this whole entire idea of the Euro-American kind of political philosophy of this celebration of liberty and equality, that has been in graveyard. So Taliban might be business friendly, but I don't think the kind of Taliban, and I don't think that there will be a Taliban which will be moderate and which will compromise on the issues of liberty and equality. The non-Muslims and the woman and the third gender, these will be really marginalized groups in this regime, whatever kind of permutation combination of this regime will be in the. So in Kashmir will that, but in our case, investments in and as far as the CA is concerned, I think that's the contentious issue, that there are forces within our country, and unfortunately, that might actually, communalize things by saying that, like, look, this is what the CA is all about. So we can actually now discriminate between the Sikhs and the Hindus and other non-Muslim groups from Afghanistan. So CA is relevant. But then the discrimination is that there are also several Muslims in Afghanistan who are also being quite oppressed under Taliban regime. So what will be our approach to them? So this is my concern in terms of dealing with Afghanistan and Pakistan. Pakistan, of course, is a known enemy. So we have certainly a kind of a clear policy, but I agree with Professor Muni that we should not be completely obsessed with Pakistan. And rather my suggestion is that we could now follow more towards neighbors like Nepal or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Bhutan, where we can actually have more good relations and more investments with them, and don't think much about Afghanistan, except that we have some kind of strategic ties with Iran and Russia and Central Asian region. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Maidul, for bringing that side of the story where India is also equally important, where the public, it is not just international relations and foreign policy aspect of engaging with Afghanistan, but also at the same time, public policy aspect of engaging within our country. And that will be equally important. How do we deal with our own people who are maybe who are marginalized in one way and who are going to be victims of our decisions as well. So those possibilities and those warnings are important to be bearing up on our mind while we make a foreign policy, which actually is one word refers to articulation of one's national interest. So thank you, Dr. Maidul, for that broad overview of the situation. And you are someone who has worked on Indian Muslims extensively, and you know what kind of actual foreign policy and public policy integration is required in that context. Thank you for that. So may I request Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, a friend and contemporary from our School of International Studies. Thank you for being here. You have been someone who has worked in South Asian studies, who has worked in Europe, who has connected between these foreign policy, international relations. You are someone who has been very, very active in public life as a political leader as well, so student leader. So like Parimal Bhaiya, you have been always speaking about issues forthrightly. So without giving long introduction about Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, may I invite Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, who is at the South Asian University, knows South Asia better, but he has studied it from European perspective as well. So maybe you can calibrate that, how Europe is looking at South Asia and how India can look at that, and what is road ahead for Afghanistan. So we will be, after your presentation, we'll be going for opening for Q&A. And Professor Muni's intervention, a brief intervention, if he's willing to make one. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Tripathi.
Thank you, Kamal. And thank you to MIT School of Governance and Public Policy for giving me this opportunity to be in a panel. It's a privilege for me to be speaking with two of my gurus in this panel. And we all were trained by Professor Muni and Professor Chinoy, and with so many friends in this panel. So speaking of the last makes things easy, so I can go very quickly on a couple of points, which I think, although covered, but may require a little bit of instruction to understand the present crisis in Afghanistan. And I will also come on what I think should be the role of India, or what should be the wider implication on the South Asian region of what is going on in Afghanistan. When we talk about Afghanistan, one phrase we use in a very romanticized manner, and that is a graveyard of empires. But unfortunately, if you ask an Afghan, they will say that this is not the graveyard of empires. Yes, this is what people like to present, but it is the poor Afghans who kept fighting the war of others, and it started from 1979. To be precise, as of course, Professor Chinoy has touched upon this, the colonial and the construction of Durand Line, and how things were at that point of a time, how Afghanistan was viewed by the colonial powers as a buffer state. But to be very precise, if you look at the modern history of Afghanistan, it starts from 1979 onwards, when the Soviets made up their mind that they have to intervene precisely to actually eliminate one of the progressive leader, which they believed were going into the American hands, and his name was Hafizullah Amin. So from there, this entire process started, and Americans who were not very interested in Afghanistan, in February 1979, there was a press conference, and in that press conference, the American president was asked, like, there was trouble in Afghanistan, and somebody asked, like, what is your view on Afghanistan? And he said that we are not very much interested. But something happened in Iran as well. Iran slipped out of American hands. So another country is going to the Soviet way or out of this American control. So that was not preferred. And at that point of a time, the American secretary, who was Brzezinski, he suggested that let's make Afghanistan a Vietnam for the Soviets. And they had made it, So they started this entire thing to defeat the Soviets. It was not for the Afghans. The American intervention in 1979 was not for the benefit or the welfare of Afghans. It was precisely in the geopolitical context of the Cold War that they came in Afghanistan, and they required, because they cannot bring all the arms, ammunition, everything from the United States of America directly to Afghanistan. So they required a state, and Pakistan came for their rescue or help. So, all the Mujahideen, the Madrasa role, Professor Chinna has already touched upon that. So this is how Pakistan emerged as a frontline state, a state to help the Americans in their Cold War Afghan strategy. What was the war? This was a holy war. And as I said, that there are a lot of issues and intervention. The intervention of Soviet Union can be critically studied. But, the holy war has a context because it brought different people from all over the world, whether it was Osama bin Laden and many other terrorist organizations, radical elements have been brought by the Americans to Afghanistan. By 1989, Soviets left. Interestingly, Americans also left Afghanistan. This is and as I said, they were not there for the welfare of the Afghans. So they left. They got engaged into their international political economic context of globalization, neoliberal world order, etc., etc. Afghanistan was completely forgotten. What happened to Afghanistan? Afghanistan got into a civil war. All the Mujahideen, different factions. There was no consensus on government formation. They started fighting among themselves. And that is the point when Taliban came into being. An excellent book by Abdul Salam Zahid, who was the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, My Days with Taliban, one should read, as how Taliban came into being. They came with a promise that they are going to bring stability and peace in Afghanistan, and they got a little bit of support of the Afghan people. And very soon they controlled almost like 90% of Afghanistan. Primarily they are Pashtun group. They are Islamic radicals, which is what our media tells us. But one point which we missed about Taliban is that they are Pashtun group. And that is why there are other groups, and Afghanistan has different ethnic Afghan ethnic diversity is very unique. There are Tajiks, there are Hazaras, there are Uzbeks, and they were opposed to this Pashtun group. And this is what we have seen in the case of Northern Alliance coming into being. So now when this started, interestingly, even Taliban was not that fundamentalist. If you look at Bamiyan Buddha, and I give this example, in 1998, Taliban was there in this valley where Bamiyan Buddha statue was there, was situated. Mullah Omar, he made a statement that he is not interested in, and within Taliban, there were factions who wanted to destroy Bamiyan Buddha. Mullah Omar made a statement that we don't want to because international tourists will come and this is something related to Afghan history. In March 2001, the same Mullah Omar has gone ahead with an order to destroy Bamiyan Buddha. And March 2001, then on 9 September, Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed. And sorry, not 9, 7 September. And then, what happened on 9/11 in the United States of America. So 2001 was a breaking point when we start seeing Taliban getting more into the fold of Al-Qaeda, So that is one part. And then American again came to Afghanistan with the idea to revenge what all had happened. And I don't want to get into the details, but the kind of a speech which President George W. Bush has given in order to justify this invasion, he almost drawn from the class of civilization thesis, like holy war, just war, the uncivilized world wanted to come for the civilized world, etc., etc. He has used all those keywords. The speech is available on a Google. You can just do and just read the speech. Interestingly, and Moidul has also pointed out, like till 2003, Americans were doing really well. But on 2003, the Americans entered into another war in Iraq on a false pretext that Saddam Hussein possesses weapons of mass destruction, and that has given a legitimacy to Al Qaeda, which said that, well, see, they are not against us, they are against the Muslim community in large, because they are going to Iraq on a very false ground, possessing weapons of mass destruction. Everybody knows that Saddam Hussein had no link with Al Qaeda. Even that was made a context for this Iraq war. Thereafter, Taliban started re-emerging, and 2021, and a lot of people say, why this is smooth like takeover of Taliban? Because a lot has been said about robust Afghan forces trained by the Americans, supported by the NATO. So who delegitimized? And I agree with Professor Buni. I don't want to repeat that. He has said it. Why this smooth takeover? My point is, from 2019, I'm taking from Professor Muni's point and just wanted to highlight this, that from 2019, when this peace process thing is started, Taliban put a condition that they do not want to talk to Afghan government because this is a puppet regime. And American accepted this. It was a regime brought by the Americans, but they have accepted the conditions of Taliban. And the moment you start accepting the condition of Taliban, you talking to a Taliban faction, which is opposed to the Afghan government, you actually delegitimize the Afghan government, and you have given a signal to the Afghan people that there are only two players in Afghanistan, that is America and Taliban. This Ashraf Ghani and their leaders are of no use. You have given this indication to the Afghan people, to the Afghan forces. So that is, and the way they exited, that's also a very critical point. Now, this is how we have to understand this Afghan issue. Now, what is going on right now? There are two factions as of now in Taliban. One, that is a Qatar faction, though the people who are talking in the peace deal, who are appearing in the news channels, etc. Mullah Brother, Muhammad Abbas, etc. Muhammad Abbas was trained in IMA Dehradun also. He had his military training here in India. These were the faces which we have seen. But interestingly, when the government was announced, they become deputy, and someone from Rahbar Shura, which is a religious congregation of Taliban and based in Quetta, he comes in, and interestingly, before the making of the government, the interim government, ISI chief was in Afghanistan. So people are saying that precisely for two reasons. One, that there was a lot of factionalism in Taliban, and this got very much in open. Second, the people of Afghanistan also started revolting, resisting, and it is not about the punchy resistance. It is also about the other resistance that we witness nowadays in Kabul, the women coming out. One of the South Asian university students has been badly beaten up by Taliban yesterday. So there is a resistance against this type of regime, So it was, Pakistan ensured that all the hardliners should be on a top position, and all the factions that was there talking to different people, presumed as soft line or not a hardliner, they became deputy, And if you look at this interim government, only 4 are non-Pashtuns, and all 4 were interestingly part of the Taliban one government. Muhammad Hanif is there, who was a part of earlier government. Tari Muhammad is there, who was a part of the earlier government. The chief of army there is the one who was leading the Taliban campaign in Panjshir. So all these people who are the non-Pashtuns were part of Taliban 1. So they are Taliban 2. So just don't go by that there is ethnic diversity there in this government. Now there is a lot of problems coming up, and factionalism is going on, and this is why that is one of the reasons that Faz Hamid, the ISI chief, was there. The second important point is that this is a new Afghanistan. Average age of Afghanistan is 18 plus. They are the people, these young people have They know the freedom. They have been to school, colleges. See, a lot of things has happened last 20 years, but also we have to give a little bit of credit that a lot of progressive thing has also been built up in Afghanistan in last 20 years in terms of women going to jobs, education, etc. So this generation is resisting. They don't want to go into that earlier phase of what, like without any civil rights, without any education, etc., etc. So they are resisting, and here, that this group also have a lot of hope from international community, and Professor Muni has already said that international community has two options available: one to calibrated engagement with Taliban, and other to really they can play on this factionalism, etc. For India also, I think both these options are available, because within Taliban there is a faction. Within Afghanistan there are people who are friends of India, and India has done some good work. India has a lot of goodwill within the Afghan young community. But the issue is like how to deal with it. I think for India, one of the major roadblocks, Professor Budi said that let's not be obsessed with Pakistan. But my point is, like whether we are obsessed with Pakistan or not, Pakistan controls Taliban. So when we say engagement with Taliban, that is one of the questions for India, like how that be possible, bypassing Pakistan, or or whether Pakistan is going to allow or give a space to India to enter into some kind of dialogue with Taliban, because the interim government that we have seen, in fact, is a message that those who are soft, they are not going to get major portions in the government that may going to come up very soon. So that's India's problem, but I think some sort of engagement is necessary from an Indian side. One, definitely we had a lot of investment, some $3 billion. Second is that, as I said, friends of India, and they have expectation from India. They want India to intervene. The loss of Afghan students who are worried for their visas, about the future. Something has to be done there. India has to, the last point, India can do two things. One, at a regional level, a very a good diplomatic initiative is required from the side of India. Some movement we have seen recently, India touching Iran, Russia. That is very important. Second, I think, is also some kind of engagement with European countries. And I agree with Professor Muni that showing a US line for such a long period of time has actually led to almost cut off of India from what is happening in Afghanistan right now. The French are worried, the Germans are worried about the developments in Afghanistan, and I think India has to engage with these countries along with Russia and Iran. So that can be a possible way of intervention. As of now, I don't see that India has some major role to play. It has to be slow, but let us not forget Afghanistan. So that is my point. The last is, as I agree with Professor Muri, that let's not play it out in the domestic politics. That will be the worst thing that we should be doing, because by that will not only helping Taliban, but also giving a wrong signal to the people who have, Afghan people who have a lot of faith on India. If we play it out in the domestic politics, that will be a very bad thing to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tripathi, for actually fleshing out some of these issues and taking it to deeper analytical level, where perhaps the challenges, issues, and all those perhaps we have to do a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat analysis of India's Afghanistan policy. So as we are actually we have crossed the time limit also, extended that, but I didn't as a moderator didn't want to exercise my privilege to stop you. I wanted to listen to you, and hopefully everyone also enjoyed that. And here, as Professor Muni has patiently listened to all of our interactions in between, would like to have him for his, if you're willing to make a short intervention there. I have two small questions, just quick questions, 10 seconds ones. Did US think that it was paying for Chinese and Russian security by containing Taliban in Afghanistan, when both of these powers are inimical in one way and competitors of the United States, both in the region and the world level? That is one. Question number two. Imran Khan says that the 20 years of Afghanistan ruled by United States was slavery. And unfortunately or fortunately, Pakistan was a great beneficiary out of that, got a lot of millions of dollars out of that. And how America accepts that kind of an acquisition says that it was dasatva se mukti, it was freedom from slavery. So the 20 years, NATO forces, United States and Pakistan, all three were slaving Afghanistan. And then now Afghanistan with Taliban, which is a slavery se mukti ho gaya. So over to Professor Moni, if he's around there and if he's able to listen to us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dash. I think we have very little time to go into the complexities of various questions. But a lot of the commented on my co-panelists have enriched the discussion, and I agree with all of them. I have no serious problem with them. One issue which has repeatedly come up is the US role in Afghanistan. And I think its various facets have been, I want to make a what you call politically incorrect statement on why the Americans entered Afghanistan. Why did they come to Afghanistan? You were saying they came, I mean, there is to US and China, contain US and China. It is essentially for their hegemonic context and what you call the rearranging of the West Asian power structure. That's what they came in. In 2002, soon after 9/11, I was invited to a conference in Hawaii, which was 1.5 conference where even the Assistant Secretary of State for the US was there. And I said, the Americans have gone into Afghanistan, but the Al-Qaeda, this is not a terrorist act alone. And I called it terrorism plus, because if Al-Qaeda wanted to enter only into a terrorist act against the US, I think they should have gone and blasted the metro system, where more people would have died and more easily without any security check. When you go to the airport, you need security check. When you go to a metro station, you don't need a security check. They would have done it. So why did they go? They actually wanted, it is an asymmetric war. It is not simply terrorism. It has resulted into terrorism. It killed innocent people, which is absolutely condemnable. But the object was to challenge the US and its hegemony. And that's why the attack were, today we are in the what you call anniversary of 9/11. And it is good to remind that the attack in the US were at 3 places. One was the Trade Center. Second was Pentagon. Third was White House. It did not fall on White House. It went somewhere else. But the target was, so White House is the political center of power. Trade Center is the economic center of power. Pentagon is the military center of power. And they chose their targets to send a very strong message that the US hegemony is not acceptable to us. And the US therefore entered in the name of terrorism. They said, we'll root you out. And as Dhananjay said very rightly, within 2 years, they went to Iraq. And here now, even in case of some of the Taliban, there's a whole lot of cry about Sirajuddin Haqqani, that he is this and he is that, and they have put $10 million on him. Now they took out Osama. Why they cannot take out Sirajuddin Haqqani? Everybody knows where he moves, how he goes. All the intelligence agencies know it. I mean, the CIA has been in touch with a number of these Taliban fighters, Mujahideen, for a very, very long time, and made use of them for whatever US thought it was strategic. So, understand in this context, repeatedly the reference comes to the US role. US is a hegemonic power, is a big power, is the major global power. There is no denying the fact. And anybody in the US's place, if tomorrow we are in that place, we would like to preserve that position. So what they are trying to do is to preserving that position, whether it is today in relation to China, or earlier it was in relation to Al-Qaeda, or it is relation to Russia, or whatever, or even Cuba for that matter. That is what the context is, which we must understand. There are several other small points, but because of time, I don't want to detain anyone else. You have now even question answers to go in.
Thank you so much for giving that brief intervention and explaining that the hegemony actually brought in United States to Afghanistan. Maybe they left also when they knew that it is no more possible to contain China and Russia without leaving Taliban Afghanistan. So maybe that is what the purpose was. We are all scratching our head to understand why actually United States left in such a hurry, but a searing hurry. So do we have a few more minutes for Q&A? Dr. Lenin Kumar and Professor Parimal ji.
If you want, just take one or two questions, sir, because it's already passing. I think the speakers only get exhausted actually. Take few questions, one or two questions, short questions actually.
Short questions, yeah. To the point questions, anyone.
Many people wrote the questions in the chat box, so you can check that.
Sir, can I go?
Can you? Yes.
How should India use the Shanghai Cooperation Organization platform to bring Central Asian countries towards India's side and batting for India's interests? So this is Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and there are several questions. So what we will do, we'll send these questions copied and pasted to our experts, and they can perhaps answer them as well. And for the next webinar some other time, because we're running out of time as well. So anyone who would like to respond to how India should use the platforms of regional alliances, which means where the Afghanistan and other neighboring countries are members as well. So India's goodwill in Middle East, goodwill in Central Asia and Russia, and China is a difficult neighbor altogether, we know about it. But how do we use Shanghai Cooperation Organization, if at all we can use that? Professor Anuradha Chenoy, would you like to respond?
Professor China is not here, yes.
Dr. Tripathi, be quick, quick answer.
Yeah, I think it's important for India to engage, but the one difficulty that I can see, and Professor Muni is here, he's the best person to respond to this question. Yes. But my point is like how India will negotiate with Taliban. That's a question number one. What sort of mechanism they will adopt. Number two, India has to really relook at its foreign policy. There is a need for engagement with other major players, and that is with China, some sort of re-engagement with Russia and Iran. That is very important. If you're talking of regional fora, then only thinking in terms of Quad, America, Western, Euro-Atlanticism is not going to help a lot. I'm not saying that these countries are not an important partner. They are. But the kind of a thing which is now emerging in Afghanistan, this is going to stay for some time. It is not going to end in next couple of months. It is going to stay, particularly because of the fact that it came up with the kind of a support and backing of Pakistan. So a lot of things may unfold in next 6-7 months. And there will be a lot of challenge for India. So better India should start relooking in its regional politics, also focusing on South Asia, but definitely these major regional players like China, Russia, Iran, and not putting too much of their, what I said somewhere like India put all its eggs in one basket as far as Afghanistan was concerned in the last 20 years, and that was the United States of America, which interestingly has not given any, in fact, any role to India in the peace process, So that's also something very interesting. So I think that recalibration of Indian foreign policy, some re-engagement is necessary.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Muni, would you like to make a last comment on that? Okay. So thank you, everyone. And as we have been running against time, and you could hear and listen to the articulate, insightful, and nuanced arguments about what is happening in Afghanistan, what is the road ahead, what are the possibilities for India, what is the possibility for international community, and why we can watch and at the same time being proactive will be useful, and why public policy and foreign policy and international relations are interconnected. All these aspects you have covered it up. And we think the last sentence from my side as a moderator is that this has been an enlightening session, and more of these sessions we will be organizing in the near future as well. Thank you, Dr. S.D. Muni, Professor and Ambassador, who actually gave the keynote speech and also set the tone for the discussion. Professor Anuradha Chenoy, thank you so much. And Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, Dr. Maidul, and everyone else who joined for taking this forward. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful to all your contribution to this platform. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dash. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of MIT School of Government, MIT World Peace University, I'd like to thank for Professor Muni for taking his time to agreeing to deliver a keynote speech, and Dash to conducting entire session, and Dr. Moitul Islam is giving its different perspective. Dr. Dhananjay Tripathi, Arvind Pelleri, and Professor Anuradha Chenoy. It's enriching and so much enlightened session. Actually, we learned a lot, because this, if you open a TV debate every day, we can see so much like the debate for meaningless debate. Actually, it's all for TRP. Actually, people make doesn't make sense. They invite, then abuse. I think this kind of session, I think students they will learn so much. I think they can learn what is actually happening in the ground level, what is the larger picture in Afghanistan, what is India's role. One thing, it's every speaker agreed we should engage with this guy, with Afghanistan, with whoever is there, with the conditions, with the condition, but also with the caution. It was the sense we are getting out of this, these roundtable conferences. We will continue to organize such conferences in a roundtable discussion in the future. Once again, I thank you all for participating, especially the speakers and students, and our head of school, Dr. Parimal Maya Sutakar, for helping to organize this thing. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. We are ending this program with the national anthem. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the participation. With this, I'm ending this roundtable conference. Thanks a lot. Thank you.